Hello, I'm Linda Yu, and welcome to this side event at the UN's High-Level Political Forum, which is the main forum to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs. Today's webinar is delighted to mark the global launch of the 2023 Asia-Pacific SDG Partnership report, jointly produced by UN ESCAP, Economic and Social Commission for Asia and the Pacific, the Asia Development Bank, UNDP, UN Development Program, who are the hosts of today's event, which is co-organized with the Government of Timor-Leste. The confluence of the global crises in energy, food, and finance as the world recovers, and for some parts of the world rather slowly, unfortunately, from the pandemic, has created a perfect storm that has disrupted livelihoods across the world and derailed progress towards the SDGs. In Asia and the Pacific, innovation is spurring at the nexus of these systems to find solutions that can bring us back on track to achieve Agenda 2030. Now, this year's Asia-Pacific SDG Partnership report, what we're launching today, serves to better understand the interconnectedness of this polycrisis on energy, food, and finance systems, and explore opportunities to deliver on the SDGs through new solutions and policy transformations at their nexus. To hear and discuss these essential issues, we will hear from leaders and experts who I will introduce in a moment, as well as hear a presentation of this important report. But first, let's watch a video to set the scene. What a powerful video that really has set the scene for the issues that we will be covering in the next hour. First, I'm delighted to say that we will have opening remarks to kick all of this off with His Excellency Karlito Nunes, who is the permanent representative of Timor-Leste to the United Nations.
Thank you. Thank you, for moderator. Excellencies, Undersecretary General Asia and the Pacific, Mrs. Armida, and Assistant Secretary General of the UN, Mrs. Kanni. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm pleased to be with you today on behalf of the Government of Timor-Leste to address the pressing issue of our time, the confluence of global crisis and localized climate change impacts in finance, food, and energy that has shaped livelihoods worldwide and derailed our progress towards achieving the Sustainable Development Goals. As we navigate the aftermath of the pandemic, floods, cyclones, and other natural disasters, we find ourselves amidst a perfect storm of challenges. This year's Asia-Pacific SDGs Partnership report, jointly prepared by ESCAP, ADB, and UNDP, serve as a crucial tool to deepen our understanding of the interconnectedness of these challenges and affecting our energy, food, and finance system. It invites us to explore new solutions and policy transformation at the nexus of these challenges, with the ultimate aim at delivering of the sustainable development goals. Today, we are honored to co-host this event. Together, we have assembled representatives from the 3 partner organizations, as well as esteemed guests from regional governments and various stakeholders. Our goal is to reflect upon the insights provided by the report and engage in meaningful dialogue to shape a path forward, a path that leverages the power of the SDGs to navigate these challenging times and create a future that is sustainable, inclusive, and resilient. The report before us represents a comprehensive analysis and the complex interplay between finance, food, and energy, unveiling the intricate web of connections that tie these systems together. It underscores the urgency to develop innovative approaches that not only address the challenges faced within each sector, but also explore the potential synergies, the transformative opportunities that arise at their nexus. By embracing this holistic perspective, we can forge pathways towards sustainable development that leave no one behind. Today, we gather to discuss not only the challenges, but also the solutions. We acknowledge that the road ahead is arduous, requiring collective action and collaborations. Governments, international organizations, civil society, the private sector, all must join hands in the voyage together. We can harness the power of partnerships and foster an enabling environment for innovation, knowledge sharing, and capacity building. As we delve into the discussions and debate that lie ahead, let us remember that we are not alone. The Asia-Pacific region, with its vast diversity and dynamics, is into opportunities, leveraging the strengths of our societies and economies to build back better. In conclusion, I urge all participants to approach this deliberation with an open mind and a collaborative spirit. Let us draw inspiration from the insights shared in the Asia-Pacific SDG Partners Report and collectively explore ways to harness the transformative power of the SDGs. Together, we can forge our future that nourishes our commitment to sustainability, inclusive, and resilience. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Your Excellency, for terrific remarks, which raising lots of themes that we will be exploring in this panel. So thank you very much indeed. It is now my pleasure to introduce a presentation of the report. We're absolutely thrilled to be joined by Armida Alisjahbana, who is Executive Secretary of UN ESCAP.
Thank you very much, Linda. Very good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all viewers and distinguished participants. Let me just start by greeting Excellency Ambassador Karlito Nunes of Timor-Leste. Good morning, as well as my colleagues, eminent speakers, Kanni Wignaraja, Ramesh Subramanian, as well as Dilhan Fernando. Excellencies, distinguished participants, I'm very pleased to present the 2023 Asia-Pacific SDG Partnership Report, which focuses on delivering on the SDGs through solutions at the nexus of energy, food, and finance. This is the 7th thematic report that ESCAP, ADB, and UNDP have published as part of a partnership that dates back to the era of MDGs. The report takes a closer look at the implications that multiple overlapping crises have on countries and for attaining the SDGs. At the same time, it explores opportunities, innovative solutions, and the way forward to transform this nexus between energy, food, and finance in order to achieve, again, the ultimate goal of a more greener, inclusive, as well as resilient future. Colleagues, the aftermath of COVID-19 pandemic, the effects of war in Ukraine, and worsening climate change, together referred to as polycrisis, have negatively affected Asia-Pacific region's energy, food security, as well as fiscal situation. This polycrisis has plunged millions more people into poverty and also has reversed years of development gains. It is disproportionately affecting the most vulnerable people as food and energy prices increase significantly. The resulting surge in inflation has worsened consumption inequality as well as created a cost of living crisis. Countries' fiscal space remains under greater stress than before, impeding their ability to support vulnerable households and prevent their economies from further decline. At the same time, climatic natural disaster continue to place a heavy burden on the most vulnerable groups, who not only have the least ability to respond, but also the least capacity to recover. So this polycrisis has pushed the SDGs even further out of reach. The region's improvement in access to affordable, reliable, and modern energy, which is under SDG 7, have been set back, with millions of people lacking the ability to pay for electricity services, for example, and bearing the burden of rising energy costs. This has also diverted urgent investment needed to strengthen progress in renewable energy. Hunger and malnutrition, which is under Goal 2, are also on the rise, with an estimated 425 million people, that is 425 million people in the region undernourished, more than 1 billion people moderately or severely food insecure. Under Goal 8, which is on decent work and economic growth, the outlook for the region's economies remain very challenging, with recovery being hampered by inflation, geopolitical tension, and recent global financial turmoil. Despite positive employment trends following the pandemic, the region's labor market is still operating below pre-crisis levels and with lower real wages. With narrow fiscal spaces and high debt burdens, countries face widening financing gaps for achieving SDGs and reversing lasting impact on the region's again developing prospect. Other goals are also directly and indirectly impacted given the highly interlinked nature of SDGs. Now, on the solution, of course, we need also to very much focus on solution. The region is witnessing promising practices and innovative approaches, which is the good news here, that strengthen the nexus and drive the much needed transformation of the region's energy, food, and finance system. Let me give you or highlight several examples here that were presented in the report. Just a quick run through of a few examples. The use of smart and low carbon farming methods. That's one good example, such as solar assisted irrigation, electric farming vehicles, and other innovative technologies. Another example is upcycling agricultural waste and therefore then turn into energy use and curbing food waste at the same time. So food waste and losses, that is. And third example is awareness program on changing diets and reducing intake of meat. Another also good example that we see increasingly small-scale solutions that change the way rural farmers participate in agricultural value chain, including facilitating women-led enterprises. We also see efforts to accelerate subsidy reforms to improve fiscal space and scale up innovative financing solution or options, such as the SDG bonds, blended finance, crowdfunding to support sustainable energy and food transition. One also at the regional, one example, at the regional sub-regional levels, the report showcases initiatives that remove cross-border trade barriers and advance just energy transition that are very critical, of course, to advance this goal on SDG 7. And the last point that the report also highlighted that the polycrisis highlighted the need for new models of energy and food production that brings about stronger this nexus of energy, food, and finance for longer-term recovery. Three main priorities going forward. The first priority is that we need to further strengthen multilateral, multi-sector partnership across this nexus of energy, food, and finance. Secondly, is also we need to develop more data-driven and adaptive institutions that enable better governance and crisis response. They also help address unforeseen challenges over the medium to longer term. And last point is we need to boost efforts that direct finance towards SDGs, which is critical in this case to align public and private financial flows with SDGs in general, as well as to mobilize new sources of financing to transform the energy food system to deliver on SDGs. With that, I conclude. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for an excellent presentation, and has highlighted indeed not only challenges, but a really, I think, comprehensive set of solutions. And I think these points will be picked up in the panel discussion that I'm just about to introduce the panelists. But before I do that, I just want to remind all of you who have joined us that there will be a Q&A after the panel. So please do get your questions ready and put it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen from now. So feel free, and I will pick that up after the panel discussion that we will have for about the next half an hour. So let me introduce the terrific set of panelists who will be discussing and shedding more light and giving more examples around this important nexus that has been highlighted in this year's report. So I'm delighted that we're joined by Kanni Wignaraja, Assistant Secretary General, Assistant Administrator and Director of the Regional Bureau for Asia and the Pacific at UNDP. A warm welcome to you. We're also joined by Dilhan C. Fernando, CEO of Dilma Ceylon Tea Company and Chairman of the UN Global Compact Network Sri Lanka. And I'm sure all of you know the Global Compact is a very important vehicle to connect the private sector to the UN SDGs. And then finally, last but absolutely not least, we're joined by Ramesh Subramaniam, Director General and Group Chief Sectors Group of the Asian Development Bank. Welcome to all of you. What an impressive panel following two impressive speakers to lead us through this, I think, complicated, but importantly, the focus is on how we can use this nexus to help improve and achieve our progress towards the SDGs. So to start with, Kanni, if I could start with you and just emphasize once again the current global challenges that the SDGs are aiming to solve are locally experienced. So you can think about urban inflation as an example, but absolutely globally linked, seen through melting glaciers. So it does seem to be very important to have a deep understanding of the local as well as the global to address these issues at the kind of scale we need in order to achieve the SDGs. So if I can ask you, how can we boost the capacity of the multilateral system to address the challenges of the SDGs while also responding to immediate crises in an agile way?
Well, thank you, Linda, and lovely to see Ambassador Nunes. Thank you for having us here, and of course, Ibu Armida and Ramesh and Dilhan. Linda, I would say if I just get to kind of three capabilities that cause us all some discomfort, because none of us are there yet. but we will be. I think first we've got to realize that these SDGs were actually designed for impact at scale. And scale is not just about volume. It's also about an ability for us to function, think, and act across multiple SDG dimensions. So I would call that horizontal scaling. We're all better at the vertical scaling, but the cascading crises that the report that I'm very proud of has that speaks to, that connects energy, food, and finance, show us that these very hard to crack challenges are so interconnected that we've got to act across these spheres in large, scalable ways. But it means we've got to renew our own capabilities as a multilateral system, but also the local capabilities to scale horizontally. I think the second issue is that the multilateral system, and the UN in particular, is uniquely placed to deal with these very messy multidimensional solutions that are based both on global and regional triggers, but also really the action has to be adapted to very local contexts. And we are in both spaces. So being present is very key. But where we're not yet there, in terms of, as you said, being more accurate or agile, is being able to harness kind of the next stage of technology with real-time data, and building then the capabilities to walk on both these feet, because otherwise we're stuck. I mean, we're stuck either in today, or worse still, we're stuck in yesterday. And finally, to say that the multilateral system, I think the onus is on us to make sure that the SDGs are actioned as a public good, as a global public good and a local public good. That takes a lot of political will, it takes guts. But I think if all stakeholders, particularly citizens, are not involved, it doesn't work. So I hope the capabilities to keep the SDGs open to the public is something also that we focus on. Back to you.
Thank you. Terrific 3 points. And I have in my mind now, horizontal scale and the emphasis on data just seems absolutely spot on. But your point about people's involvement just leads me to the next question I like to ask Dilhan about, which is actually just to remind us the impact of this polycrisis on people. And Dilhan, Sri Lanka is an example of a country where different crises have collided, making a perfect storm, to use that phrase. So just can you tell us a bit about the impact this has had on the people in Sri Lanka?
Well, Linda, it took us literally to the brink a year ago. And the thing about an economic crisis, if that it followed so soon after the pandemic, and of course the social economic impacts of the pandemic itself, was that it then precipitated at one level, at possibly the most visible level, the social, environmental, the health, nutritional, educational impacts. But then that could easily have slipped into, you could call it, failure of the state, because there was also the political stresses that evolved, the discontent amongst the people, and which had the potential, had it not been contained so swiftly, to have taken Sri Lanka completely off the map, which meant, when I talk about off the map, the pressure that it creates on business then results not only in the brain drain, which is the visible part of it, but also in capital flight. So you had businesses running away from the country for fear of instability and political chaos, etc. That happens in any equivalent situation. But the impact generally has been poverty levels significantly higher. So we are now, I believe, at the last assessment was that poverty in Sri Lanka is up from 13.1% to I think nearly 25%. Food security, medicines, we see some of the hospitals even yet, although on the surface, Sri Lanka appears to be functioning normally. We have growth in tourism, etc. The fundamentals yet need to be addressed, and that is expressed today in health care issues, people not having medication for dialysis, and so many other critical conditions. Of course, the UN has intervened on several occasions. Private sector has intervened, but that's not enough. Ultimately, we need all these interconnected economic, social, environmental, the private sector, all of these factors to re-stabilize before we can see some normalcy. So the impact has been catastrophic.
Wow, I'm quite staggered by that, and also to think a quarter of people in Sri Lanka are living in poverty. I mean, that is extraordinary, and really, I think you've done a brilliant job highlighting why this is so urgent for us to be able to come together and to really focus on delivering the SDGs, especially at this nexus of finance, food, and energy. And on that point, I'd like to turn to Ramesh. We also know that in the region, and in fact, it's not just the countries in the Asia-Pacific region, but also elsewhere, but certainly also seen in Asia, that fiscal conditions have worsened because of this polycrisis over the last few years. So it'd be great to get your thoughts on how governments can enhance their public financial management to boost public investment, support the SDGs amidst this worsening of financial conditions.
Thank you, Linda. The fantastic overview that people Armida presented, as well as what the other fellow panel members and Ambassador Nunes highlighted. The challenges are quite severe. In fact, the report clearly highlights that even before the pandemic, the pandemic has obviously worsened the situation even more. But even before the pandemic, the world could not have met the goals by 2030. We would have had to push it out to 2065. So that's a massive setback that was going to happen. And the pandemic has clearly heightened the urgency. So here, coming to fiscal issues, broadly public financial management issues, clearly comprehensive reforms and changes needed on both the expenditure front as well as on the revenue front. And countries have certainly, the impact of the pandemic notwithstanding, countries have started putting in place measures, but a lot more needs to be done. As I mentioned, if before the pandemic, the distance was actually considerably significant, then clearly the measures need to be doubled up, tripled up in all the countries. Now on the expenditure side, clearly budgeting reforms are going to be quite critical because fiscal space has been taken away. And here when we talk about expenditures, there is a very clear recognition that fiscal consolidation is not a matter of if, it's going to be a matter of when. But any such fiscal consolidation obviously has to be rolled out in a responsible manner, as previous crises have shown. Speedier fiscal consolidation for the sake of it will be producing more shocks to the system. So first is budget reforms, which the report quite clearly highlights, picking up from what we've done in past crises. Measures to boost expenditure efficiency are going to be very, very critical as well. Now here in terms of bringing in, besides the budget reforms, procurement reforms are going to be quite critical. Public procurement reforms in terms of getting more value for money for public expenditures, whether it's for small scale infrastructure investments, including operations and maintenance, and larger scale capex type of investments, you do need to have more value for money. And related to this, what is also needed with regard to boosting expenditure efficiency would be to have a more, the entire life cycle concept in terms of when we look at asset creation, particularly with regard to the SDG attainment, where you do need to have assets that will have lasting impact. And another aspect of expenditure efficiency is to revisit the whole issue of subsidies, whether it's agriculture subsidies. Despite the impact of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, clearly fertilizer markets have been affected. But here, the impact notwithstanding, countries do need to look at how well targeted agriculture and fertilizer subsidies are. And food and fuel subsidies also need to be less distortionary, and countries need to be looking at. On the revenue side, a whole range of measures will be needed. If you look at, again, even before the pandemic has certainly brought in more challenges. If you look at tax to GDP ratio, we have the magic threshold of 15%, kind of the gold standard. None of the countries in Asia and Pacific, or very few countries, have gone to that threshold. In fact, what we are looking at is there a possibility of at least some of the countries to reach the OECD norm of 25%, which is actually a tall order. But even if countries are able to go 15% first and then to go to 17, 18%, that certainly would be creating that fiscal cushion, fiscal space. So tax reforms and other non-tax reforms that are backed up by these expenditure efficiency measures that I mentioned going to be quite critical. Now, when we are looking at creating infrastructure assets, what kind of additional value that we can get in terms of mobilizing additional tax revenues will also be quite important. And here, concepts that have been tried out in some of the countries, such as transit-oriented development, which could enhance the value of infrastructure assets that we are creating. Many of them are going to be quite helpful in the SDG context. We need to look at, and some of the countries are looking at, some good examples that come to mind are in the Southeast Asian context, for instance, is Philippines, Thailand, Indonesia. But other countries that have also embarked on reforms are in South Asia, like, for example, India, Bangladesh, and so on. But a lot more needs to be done, Linda. Let me pause for now.
A lot more does need to be done, but those are fantastic starting points to just get all of us thinking about how we can do public finances just a bit differently, I think, in this context. So thank you very much. Just a reminder to all of you who have joined us, there'll be a chance to ask questions of the panel after the discussion. So please feel free to put your question in the Q&A box, and I will come to that in a bit. But first, I do want to probe more into the integrated solutions and the policy transformations that are in this important report, which for those of you who haven't had a chance to, please do download and read it. It's got fantastic insights, specifically on this nexus of food, energy, and finance. So this is the question I'd like to pose to Kanni, which is, can you just say a bit more about the solutions, policy transformations that can be harnessed to advance the SDGs in the Asia-Pacific region?
Thank you, Linda. And I think sometimes, we stumble upon these words like integrated, and then we get stuck on them. But if you unpack actually the practicalities of what this means, I think maybe that whole kind of COVID period showed us that we are very capable of thinking outside of our comfort zones, if you wish, and going for much more integrated solutions. So some things that worked in the short term during COVID, I hope can stay with us. I mean, not all of it is affordable at that level, but even at a pared down ability to respond, if we, as certainly from the public sector, governments, if they better target some of the things they did try during COVID in terms of policy and investment instruments, like the support to primary health systems or distribution systems, to social protection for the most vulnerable, even getting more into renewables, because budgets, we were going broke, and Dilhan brought up a very good example on Sri Lanka. So we can make some of these more integrated solutions affordable if they're better targeted to the most vulnerable, and if countries look at their current incentive systems. So instead of the large general subsidies, targeted subsidies on nutrition for kids and mothers, on removing the cost of subsidies, the heavy cost of fossil fuel subsidies, So you're still working within the current budget. You're not growing the debt burden, but it's a matter of pivoting on choice. I think, I mean, if I look at countries all the way from large countries, populous countries like India and China, to small island states like Singapore, you're seeing a complete change in integrated smart agriculture, for example. Now, with that, the cost of carrying arable land comes down, the cost of fertilizer comes down, and yet yields are going up. So I think the issue there is, unfortunately, what we don't have in many countries is the political staying power, because these are not overnight solutions, right? If you're going for real integrated solutions like switching industry to renewables or switching to smart agriculture, you have to stay with it. You can't just try this over a few months. So what the report really calls for is, even if political leadership keeps changing with election cycles, policy leadership needs to remain steady state to really move. And I'll just put two other things that I really like as these type of solutions. Is we've seen from countries like Indonesia, now Vietnam, many others, going for public-private blended finance for sustainable infrastructure, because sustainable infrastructure is costlier in the short run because your immediate startup costs are higher. But over a period of time, you can see it's amortized and it's much, much reduced cost when you think of how often our countries have to keep replacing infrastructure because of natural disasters. I also must say I like when you come to sovereign debt solutions, one of the instruments, and Ramesh spoke to this and we brought it up, is some of the debt swap out instruments. And I particularly like the debt for nature swaps. They're not easy, but they have this dual purpose, right, of reducing your debt burden while also helping countries conserve and manage their environment. So I think there's a long ways to go, but integrated solutions, just digital tech, and Dilhan and I have had this conversation many times, is you can, if you execute it well in these fields of food, energy, and finance, it reduces the inefficiencies that Ibu spoke about when she introduced the report. It reduces corruption and bureaucracy, but it also helps to increase productivity. So there will be a harsh pushback on integrated solutions because you're pushing out vested interests. But these are the changes that we have to make if the SDGs are to happen. Back to you.
Fantastic examples. And as an economist, it's music to my ears when you said that you have to make choices. Every budget is a set of choices. And indeed, having a longer term policy strategy to deliver on those objectives is absolutely key, especially for this kind of crisis, which requires an integrated solution. As we've certainly heard, digital can play a part in that, institutions, and the private sector, which is what I'm going to post to Dilhan right now. You were mentioned there a moment ago in Kanni's fantastic elaboration of what we can do. So Dilhan, let me just ask you, what do you think private sector players can do to accelerate the transition to more sustainable energy and food systems? And I'm just going to put an underline here and put it in bold, channel more capital towards the SDGs.
Well, I think, Linda, the SDGs, when you really understand what they're about, are more or less a blueprint for sustainable business. They are a blueprint for the survival of business. And I think it's only businesses that are are desperate not to build back better post-pandemic, that are struggling to hold on to a decayed and obsolete business model. So if you look at poverty, eliminating poverty simply builds the capacity and the stability in a nation. If you look at gender equality, it unlocks tremendous, phenomenal value, education, innovation, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that the first and most important thing is mindset. We need to address mindset, possibly by strengthening awareness. Now, I think awareness is plentiful, but we need, as businesses, we need to speak to other businesses, and we need to initiate that mindset change through collaboration. So some of the ways we have done it in Sri Lanka, as an example, through the Chamber of Commerce, we are establishing a climate ambition coalition. In 2012, we set up, in collaboration with IUCN and our business, we set up something called Biodiversity Sri Lanka, looking at conservation, restoration. We've set up Genesis, a center for nature-based solutions, trying to help agri-entrepreneurs, helping them to understand what's happening, because a lot of it is the micro and small entrepreneurs who are ultimately going to move the needle, who simply can't grasp, and you can't expect to send out emails and expect them to understand what's happening, because it is also beyond their capability. So we need to build some of the elements. Now, one of the ways in which that's happening is in recognizing that the opportunity for business lies in embracing the SDGs. So as an example, we have businesses here that are promoting startups, looking at IT innovation, and some of the IT innovation, as Kanni mentioned, is aiding the digitization that is going to eliminate or reduce corruption, that is also going to enable small entrepreneurs who are really at the front line of climate change, who are at the front line of our ability to stop unsustainable urban migration. It's strengthening the rural economy is critical to this, and that needs collaboration and an understanding by businesses that if we fail to strengthen the rural economy, if we fail to build an enabling environment for the small farmers, we are going to lose the battle. Well, it's not a battle, but lose the adaptation or benefit with climate change. We are going to lose the migration battle and so on. So I think it's that, but we've also got to influence our supply chains. Again, it's a question of possibly ignorance, possibly refusal to accept the reality. So as businesses, we need to, and this is something that we are doing, we're all trying actively in Sri Lanka, many of us, we need to influence our suppliers, and whether they are dragged kicking and screaming to the table through our own decisions to implement climate resilient practices, to implement the SDGs into our supply chain. And there's the UNGC Academy itself has a multitude of ways in which it's again a toolkit for implementation. Once that is done, we're able to influence the small and micro entrepreneurs. You have packaging suppliers who don't understand how damaging the use of non-eco-friendly printing inks are on the environment, but realizing that, seeing the option, and of course being rewarded for using the correct thing and doing the right thing, makes a change that can influence water quality at a massive scale. So I think the role of businesses in the adoption of SDGs has fundamentally changed, because the urgency is underlined by what we see. I mean, since when did Europe have heat warnings for 46 degrees? So this kind of thing happening means that we've got to act much faster, and the role of business has changed. It's no longer up to governments, it's no longer up to the UN, it's up to every business as well.
Thank you very much. I now have a vision of everyone coming to the table in a collaborative way, and because of your backdrop, enjoying a lovely cup of tea as well. I'm going to open this up to the Q&A portion in a moment. So again, the audience, if you have any questions, just pop it into the Q&A. But before we do that, I want to come to you, Ramesh, because I understand the Asia Development Bank has just launched its new operating model in order to be more agile and adapt to these pressing challenges. So just tell us, what is the ADB specifically doing to maximize the existing resources, increasing financing capacity, private capital, and domestic resource motivation? And how is this new operating model being more effective to deliver solutions through a more country-led approach, and specifically, of course, for the SDGs?
Thank you very much, Linda. The insights that Dilhan and Kanni brought to the second round of questions were fantastic. So I'll use some of them as a segue. The challenges that the world is facing, Asia-Pacific developing countries are facing, are very significant. They're also quite different. When we look at new problems, we need new solutions. Oftentimes tested solutions work, but sometimes new problems need new solutions. We cannot be offering old solutions, whether it's the technology aspect that Kanni talked about, or some of the value chain type of changes that Dilhan talked about that we need to bring. ADB has been, I would say, quite methodical in the past. If you look at our 57 years of history, we've been quite prudent in terms of making any organizational changes. We've not been, doing them very frequently, although internal changes have taken place in terms of improving our business processes, providing faster support to countries, coming up with new modalities, instruments, and so on. But before the around the time of the pandemic, just prior to that in 2018, our board approved a new strategic framework called Strategy 2030, which is a broad landscape in terms of making the region more inclusive, more sustainable, more resilient, as well as prosperous. We had implemented that strategy for 2 years. Then, we had the onset of the pandemic. Then this, recognition that we certainly need to be leveraging our resources a lot more. That focus has always been there, but the heightened concern that we need to make our money go longer in terms of the support that we can provide, or in other words, how can we use our capital more efficiently? And then this has also been the call from all of our shareholders. I'm just, coming from a G20 Sherpa meeting yesterday, where this is discussed quite extensively in terms of the MDB reforms. So the new operating model that you referred to, Linda, what it does is it looks at all of these problems, and of course, many of them aggravated by the pandemic, and asks the question, what are the key shifts that we need to help the Asia-Pacific countries deal with? And here there are 4 shifts that the new model will accomplish, or will help the developing countries accomplish. The first is the climate change shift. Clearly, climate crisis is an existential crisis, and we would like to position ADB as the climate bank for the region. So first is climate. Second is private sector development shift. Clearly, for SDGs, the role of the private sector is so immensely critical. The fiscal consolidation challenges that I mentioned in the first round are so significant that whatever governments will try and do on expenditure efficiency and bringing in new sources of revenue, they are not going to be adequate. You need private capital coming in. What role can ADB as an MDB do? What kind of larger role in terms of leveraging private capital resources? That is the motto or premise behind the second shift, which is the private sector shift. The third one is the solutions orientation. Here, if I look at, again, the technology point that Kanni mentioned, or the value chain, like, for example, in terms of the packaging waste, for example, or new digital technology solutions that need to be brought in, countries do need solutions. Can ADB be much more responsive, much more nimble, and speedier in terms of bringing these solutions to the table? Look at energy, for instance. New energy solutions will be needed, whether it's battery storage or new mobility systems, or things like green hydrogen, for example. Can we help countries through new solutions? And the fourth is clearly one institution, one country, one entity alone cannot do things on its own. You need partnerships, and you need, even within institutions, within countries, you need to work together by bringing the whole development ecosystem together. And that is the fourth shift, Linda, which we call as a new ways of working shift. So on how are we using our resources more efficiently is by coming up with new solutions. And internally, ADB has got a unique model of having a single balance sheet covering our public and private sector operations. Can we be more efficient? Can we be more innovative in bringing the sovereign and non-sovereign parts of ADB together to offer much higher value to our countries? And finally, last point I'll make here is, as is quite well known, the call by shareholders, G20 as well as other shareholders, on using our capital more efficiently to create more headroom for assistance for the financing challenges that countries face. They are also behind this. But the new model has now already been rolled out based on 2 years of work done. Many of the issues that are covered in the report, Linda, we are very confident that we will be able to address them and work with our countries in meeting the challenges more efficiently. Let me leave it there for now.
Fantastic to hear. Strategy 2030, perfect timeline in terms of the SDGs. I now want to move to questions that have come in. But first, I actually want to thank Kanni Wignaraja, because she unfortunately does have to go before the end, but we really appreciated your insightful contributions and, of course, your valuable time. It's been fantastic to have you. But joining us for the Q&A, I'm delighted to say, is His Excellency Karlito Nunes, Permanent Representative of Timor-Leste to the UN. So he will be joining us to field some of these questions. But the first question that's come in, I think I'm actually going to direct to Ramesh. So just to warn you, it's coming, Ramesh, which is how important is regional cooperation in achieving and how can it be improved?
It's super, super important. I'm very glad that question has come. In fact, OCI, as we call regional cooperation and adding integration, has been the founding reason for ADB. So it's in our DNA, so to say. When we talk about the nexus in this report, countries need to cooperate a lot more because you've got significant regional public goods dimensions to the issues and the challenges that we are talking about. For instance, in the energy sector in the Greater Mekong sub-region, we work with countries in promoting energy cooperation in terms of addressing the demand and supply situation more efficiently, come up with renewable energy solutions. And with the new technology options that are available, can we bring transmission costs down? Or one example, and in the pandemic situation, how can countries work together in addressing challenges that have come from the pandemic through coordinated surveillance? Now, when we talk about health and the food or agriculture and energy nexus, Linda, we need to look at health not just from a human health perspective, but we call it the One Health framework in terms of the animal health, human health, and plant health together. And for that, regional cooperation is very, very critical. So it's a must, and it should be done. It should be done a lot more. And here, multilateralism can be very helpful.
Fantastic, and great to hear, I just say. Thank you, Ramesh. So, Your Excellency, Karlito Nunes, can I pose a question to you, please, which is, just tell us how Timor-Leste is addressing this nexus of food, finance, and energy. Just a bit more on that, and how can the international community help?
The Timor-Leste case, I think we need international financial institutions to work with national or domestic private sectors, especially when talking about agriculture sectors. This is a very important sector for us in Timor-Leste. this sector will be enabling our people, especially at the grassroots level, to improve their productions when they have enough resources to do farming, example, especially at the rural areas. So I think this is a really key for us. So the idea is we want to build our country now from bottom up. You know, many times there is a good policy from top down, but sometimes it's not really reflect the reality in each country. So I think this is what we really want, the partnership of private sectors, international private sectors or international financial institutions with Timor-Leste's private sector. Thank you.
Thank you. Really important points being raised there. Dilhan, can I come to you? Because obviously this whole discussion has been just so, I think, productive because it is a conversation between the public and the private sectors. I ask you specifically on the role that climate action and climate finance can play in this nexus. And is there a way to ensure that climate and the SDG agendas are aligned, speaking from a private sector perspective?
Unquestionably, and I think that leading on from what I shared earlier concerning the SDGs being very much a blueprint for future of business, I think if you also connect that with issues like, as an example, food waste, and look at innovation as a means of building resilience, particularly where food security is concerned. Look at, globally food waste has I think the last figure I saw was around 24%. In Sri Lanka and in many countries in the region, it's more in to the order of 30 to 40%. Now, the impact of that, not only on the food, not only on the GHGs, but that in totality is something like 1.5 billion tons of primary product. I think that's an FAO figure, but impact of that on the smallholder is significant. And I think ultimately our best option for strengthening climate action is to strengthen the micro and small and medium entrepreneurs. And the reason for that is them being at the coalface or the front line. The more we create an enabling environment, give them a fair price, build the digital platforms like Thailand has done, India has done, that will enable them to get a fair price for their produce, which will incentivize them in similar way as I mentioned earlier on the supply chain sustainability, incentivize them to do the right thing, adopt agroforestry, adopt biochar. There's a multitude of means. And I think ever since 2005, since the Stern report, the solutions to all of this has been so visible, so available. And at this point, looking at how we can unlock that, I think one of the ways is simplifying access to climate finance. And I can tell you that Sri Lanka, I mean, I sit on the Chamber's Climate Action Group, Biodiversity Sri Lanka, UNGC, and I can tell you that there's very few people in business or in the banking sector who really understand what it's going to take to be able to access some of these funds. But there is a multitude of opportunities led by innovation, food security. So, I mean, right now, Sri Lanka is reinventing itself. So we are looking at promoting innovation. The president is looking at digitization. And we have an opportunity. Every crisis ultimately leads to significant change. So in order to use that positively, we need to build the digitization. We need to be able to be as inclusive as possible, not only where women are concerned, but also where micro entrepreneurs are concerned, because ultimately we need to build a new society that is not only climate adapted or climate resilient, but also has the social, economic, environmental and other aspects, because this isn't the final, this isn't the last crisis we're going to face. I think we've got a lot more crises ahead of us, whether they're health or whichever it is. So I think that in summary, climate finance is absolutely essential to be able to unlock, whether it is climate action by businesses or whether it is addressing food security and try to build resilience amongst communities. But the means for us to build livelihoods into the agriculture, the precision agriculture, the different climate and environmental interventions that we need to build that resilience, it's so blatantly obvious. It'll take 10 seconds on the internet to be able to access some of these methods, but access to climate finance or green finance is critical, and it is an issue.
Fantastic. And in fact, that probably, we didn't get to all the questions, but somehow, Dilhan, you've actually answered one of the questions that I was hoping we would get to, which is to align government and private sector activities more broadly in terms of the energy transition. And indeed, that is a theme for today that has come through very, very strongly. I would also say, you know, there's a lot more coming in. I'm sorry we don't have time, but I think Ramesh has also highlighted the ADB venture facility, helping startups in this space, reimagining how finance could be done. I think it's actually a brilliant point to end this discussion, because the transformation of blended finance, of green finance, of using the capital that we have in a more effective way through partnerships, digitalization, using public institutions to crowd in private investment in order for us to all work together and achieve the SDGs, especially at this important nexus of food, finance, and energy, has just come out so strongly from all of your comments. And I think you've given us, you've certainly given me as an academic, a real sense of inspiration, that there's leadership here, there's innovative thinking, and there's a real willingness to engage the public and the private sphere. So on behalf of everyone who has watched this discussion over the past hour, let me just say a huge thank you to fantastic speakers for dedicating their time and indeed, you know, their careers to improving the world through the SDGs. And I'm highly hopeful that Asia-Pacific, you know, will be a region that continues to outpace growth, overcome its challenges, and achieve the SDGs by 2030. So thank you all very much for your time. And I'd also just like to thank the incredible team that put this together. I can't name everyone because we are now actually over time, but you know who you are, absolutely brilliant. That couldn't think of a better way to launch this important report. So again, thank you all, and enjoy the rest of your day. And remember, download the report, read it, and get involved. Thank you all.